West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire. We're
going to talk now about the new reporting on payments to the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. Citing documents it reviewed, the Washington Post reports that conservative judicial activist Leonard Leo paid Ginny Thomas tens of thousands of dollars for consulting work, but gave specific instructions that her name be left off the paperwork. According to the Post, in January of 2012, Leo instructed GOP pollster Kellyanne Conway to bill a nonprofit group he advises and use that money to pay Thomas. The same year, the nonprofit, the Judicial Education Project, filed a brief to the Supreme Court challenging a landmark civil rights law aimed at protecting minority voters. NBC News has not seen the documents or independently confirmed this reporting. In a statement to the Post, Leo addressed his instructions for the paperwork, writing, quote, "Knowing how disrespectful, malicious, and gossipy people can be, I have always tried to protect the privacy of Justice Thomas and Ginny."
Wait, Leonard.
Just let that sit
when
for
you're
a second.
sending money to
Take that in.
a Supreme Court justice or a family member of the Supreme Court justice, it's gossipy for Americans to know that money's being funneled. And this is a guy who now what? He's got $1.5 billion to funnel around. Ken, listen, you got to say at some point, I've always admired the fact that John Roberts is an institutionalist, even when I didn't agree with his rulings on both sides. But I always respected the fact that he was institutionalist. But that label only applies to him for so long if he allows this to continue in his court without coming out. I mean, because at the end of the day, either the Supreme Court is going to issue a new set of ethics rules and guidelines, or another branch of government are. The United States Congress has the power and the authority to do it, and you just wonder if the Chief Justice is going to keep sitting back and letting all of this information come out, most of it against Clarence Thomas, that hurts the court.
And this story, I think, has a different character than some of the others because this is a direct payment and an effort to conceal a payment. This isn't about luxury travel, which is bad enough.
Trying to conceal a payment.
Right.
Giving instructions, conceal this payment to a justice's wife.
Well, it flies in the face also of these disclosure documents that, I didn't really understand how to do them. I didn't think I could do them, or whatever the excuse is. Now it appears that there was an effort to make sure things weren't seen. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I, as a reporter, people have known for years or suspected that Supreme Court justices were taking trips that weren't disclosed. There was actually an effort that I'm aware of in the Senate Judiciary Committee to try to track that by going to the marshals who protect the justices and try to get records. But they were unsuccessful. They couldn't penetrate the veil of secrecy, and now good journalists have done that, and I think it's important that we're learning all this.
And by the way, we're going to hear BS from the usual defenders of Clarence Thomas. Oh, they're just picking on him because he's a conservative and they hate black conservatives. This challenges the, blah, 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 all of this other nonsense. If we were reporting on a story this morning that Chuck Schumer's wife got paid, tens of thousands of dollars, and that there had been a direction from the biggest lobbyist in the Democratic Party to keep the payments quiet, we'd be saying the same thing here today. And that is a pure rank nonsense that the Wall Street Journal editorial page, National Review, all these other people have been spewing about how, they're just picking on Clarence. No, this is obvious. This is obvious as Clarence Thomas going through everything that he and his wife were going through in the middle of January the 6th. And not stepping aside on a case where he became the lone dissenter when he had a real interest in that case itself. It just keeps piling up.
It does. I mean, assertion after assertion, I would want to say fact after fact, but we're still investigating this. Trips for Thomas, payments for school tuitions for people who were related to him, payments to his wife. You get the sense that Thomas and others on the court see themselves as victims. People are out there to get us and think that they get to live by different rules than any other judge in America.
By the way, I knew guys I served with in Congress who got a golf trip to Ireland paid for by Jack Abramoff.
Just a basketball game.
And went to jail. Bob Ney went to jail for that. There were several others who went to jail. And these guys are whining about how they're victims. No, Jonathan Lemire, they're not victims. They're on the Supreme Court of the United States of America, 9 of the most powerful people in the world. They just apparently don't think that the rules that apply to members of Congress apply to them. And you know who's not happy about that? Members of Congress.
Yeah, the Senate Judiciary Committee, of course, convened just this week to try to get a code of ethics put in place for the Supreme Court. Chief Justice Roberts declined to attend, and those efforts have been utterly stymied. And there's been some reporting about a favor given to Justice Gorsuch, but most of this surrounds Clarence Thomas, of course. The Harlan Crow reporting from earlier this week, even just yesterday, we had pro-Republican reporter on the show here talking about tuition payments being paid for the child who the Thomases were raising as their son. But it's also worth spending a moment just really emphasizing who Ginny Thomas is here. It's a hugely important figure on the right for a number of years, and it was her text messages to Mark Meadows that were so key. She was urging him in the wake of the 2020 election to keep fighting to try to overturn the democratic process. We're showing a few of them now here, talking about how media reporters should be arrested, detained for ballot fraud. People should be going to Gitmo.
She said, if you go back to that last one, Ginny Thomas saying that the Biden crime family should be on barges, criminal barges off of Gitmo. Talk about the radicalism and the extremism, which, by the way, had an impact on Clarence Thomas and the way he ruled in a case involving January the 6th.
How can it not?
Biden crime family. This is stuff right off of Breitbart and the extreme right wings. Here she is saying, help this great president stand firm, Mark. The majority knows Biden and the left is attempting the greatest heist of our history. Another message, she suggests that Donald Trump was divinely inspired to be there to lead the republic. So Kate, this is all seemingly linked. And also in those messages, Ginny Thomas talks about how she discusses this all with her, quote, best friend, who reporting later reveals, of course, is her husband, Clarence Thomas. So just tell us about the role that she plays and why this is so disturbing that someone so close to a justice espousing those sort of radical, dangerous views she and her husband are receiving gifts and payments from some of the most influential people on the right who have business in front of the Supreme Court.
Well, right. I mean, it's appalling, frankly. It is appalling. And if you look at, the role that Justice Thomas has in deciding some of these cases, I mean, if you look at the Post story this morning about the Leonard Leo money, the case that was in front of Justice Thomas following that payoff, essentially, was Shelby, was the Voting Rights Act case. So, I mean, this influence and this attempt to hide influence has a massive and real life impact on things that matter to people. I mean, we're talking about protecting your right to vote. We're talking about somebody who sits on the court and makes a decision about whether people who have historically been disenfranchised in this country are going to continue to have access to the ballot box. So I think we should not lose sight of that too, that the underlying case that we're talking about this morning, is the Voting Rights Act case. And the other thing, Joe, you mentioned Bob Ney. I mean, the Republicans also lost the House in 2006 in part because of the Abramoff scandal and because people were paid off. So, Americans have shown that this is not behavior that they support when people have the opportunity to vote and to say, this is not what I want from an elected official or, obviously someone on the judiciary who's outside of someone on the Supreme Court who's outside of facing political ramifications. But, this is part of why people are losing faith in institutions, have lost faith in institutions. It's incredibly, incredibly damaging.
It is Friday, the 5th of May of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. Well, how are you? It's Friday. We made it, and I suppose there's going to be a lot more news over the weekend. It's been this way since, when that guy with the golf courses and tall buildings with his name on them, when he pretty much took over, changed everything around. The weekends was like the Friday news dump when everybody would forget what was going on because it was Friday and you didn't care. Now it doesn't care about you. Anyway, it's great to see the LIV, the Live Golf Tournament, get dragged into international intrigue. We all said that is exactly what it is. We call it the Bonesaw Golf Tournament. They should have the trophy as a bone saw. Well, all those golfers who went for the big payout, I think you are, shall we say, accomplices to a crime as well. Dupes. All right. They hope they're just dupes. So, Jenny Thomas, Leonard Leo, the Federalist Society. I warned everybody, not just me, but we warned everybody back in the 80s when the Federalist Society first started making the big-time inroads during the Reagan administration, that this seemed like all the old Soviet fighters were now adopting the 70-year Soviet plan. Okay, so it turned out to be 50 instead. They went for the long game. We warned everybody about it. Of course, what did I do? I don't know. Went surfing at the wedge. If you survive the wedge, you can tell people about it. And what's even better about surviving the wedge is if you can survive it without wearing what we would call the wedge halo. When you have to wear that weird thing around your head with all the wires and shoulder contraption so that your head doesn't move. Call that the wedge halo, because that's what would happen if you surfed or body surfed the wedge and you rode the wave wrong. It's a shore break. All the water on the beach goes up into the wave, and sometimes it's going to be about 15, 20 feet. Very short ride. Fun if you live. Anyway, so maybe that was what was more important back in the day. Maybe. No, there was only so much the likes of us could do, the likes of we could do back in the day. We talked about it, set off the alarm, tried to get political candidates of like mind to be elected, worked hard at it. So I don't know. I guess maybe we should have set up our own think tanks. I wish I had the wherewithal and the money to do that. We do have our think tanks. It's just that apparently we don't play the game the way the game's supposed to be played, and that's like handing out a bunch of money to make people do what you want them to do. This is what's so maddening about the right wing. They have to have people tell them what to do and pay them to do it. We do things out of the goodness of our heart. They think the only reason we're doing the things out of the goodness of our heart is because there's something transactional going on. You can only be doing this because you're getting something for it, just like me. That's a justification of a sinner. All right. Another justification of a sinner is telling everybody, everybody's a sinner. Everybody. Seems to me that's one way of absolving your sins, by ascribing sins to other people who would never sin that way. Everybody's a crook. No, they're not. So we have a work cut out for us. We knew it back in the day, how transactional they were with a capital T. That's why we rebelled against it. And then after a while, we thought, actually, I'm tired of giving and not getting anything in return. And we fell into that transactional mode ourselves. But we tried for a long time, I have to say. So it does kind of crack me up when I hear young'uns say or claim, I'm not going to vote for them because they didn't work hard enough for me. Hey, we've been working hard for a lot longer than you've been around on this green earth. I don't know, parched earth? Is it so green anymore? It's still a blue orb from afar. So what are we going to do about the Federalist Society, Leonard Leo, the Thomases? What are we going to do about the MAGA Supreme Court? I know all 9 signed on to some sort of paperwork that John Roberts claims that the court doesn't need to have any oversight. They're doing well enough by themselves. What I heard is that the 3 non-MAGA justices signed something completely different. Pretty much saying, oversight of the court would be a nice thing. Look at what the hell's going on now. And they want to throw Hunter Biden in jail for what? Whatever they can make up. And even what they make up, they still can't seem to get enough to get that guy in jail. And what? Marjorie Taylor Greene says that she's got some sort of great evidence that Joe Biden has been dealing with some kind of foreign national for all this time. All this time. Yep. While at the same time saying he's so senile, he doesn't know what he's doing, he can't even talk. The most senile criminal mastermind in the history of the whole world. They think because they are crooks, everybody has to be a crook. They think because they took out all those PPP loans and got loan forgiveness that, everybody should be able to do it. And if they're not able to do it, and they did, and we don't like their politics, we can blame them for being hypocrites. And it didn't happen. Like I say, they do things because people tell them to do it, then pay them to do it. A MAGA voter doesn't know how to vote until someone tells them how to vote. All they need to hear is no taxes. Kick every racial minority in the world that we can come up with. And when we're done with them, we'll find a group and groups that we can kick some more. And when we run out of them, maybe we'll start kicking ourselves. I don't know if they're getting paid to do it, but they seem, I gotta tell you, it's not cheap having all those guns. It's not cheap, getting those giant mega Hummer monstrosity trucks. And they have caravans of them with giant flags that are not cheap either. Flying, 2 of them, flying from the bed of their truck on either side of the passenger and the driver's side. Sometimes they got a flag so big, they got to have a trailer hitch in the bed of the giant pickup to be able to put the pole of that giant flag in there and fly it in the middle of the bed. Caravans of these. And they're all armed to the teeth. Yeah, they're doing poorly, aren't they? Yeah, economic anxiety is just a nice way of saying that they're Burgermeister racists. Hell, they had enough money to be able to rent a Lear jet from Arizona or wherever and fly to D.C. Oh, it was really cheap, though. You get 3 people and rent a Lear jet. It's not that much. Yeah, it is. Still. I don't remember even thinking about taking a Lear jet when we went to an anti-war protest anywhere in the United States of America. Driving the VW bus, maybe. Take a few friends. Camp out along the way. Lear jets. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're doing poorly. Okay. I did see that the Wall Street Journal has finally gotten on the bandwagon and figuring out that COVID inflation was really about corporate profits. Corporate price gouging. They're finally coming around to it. Exactly what we said at the time it was happening. It was only obvious. But they need a tanked economy so they can blame Joe. It's just, apparently the economy and the American people are not obliging. No wonder they want to tell us what to do. And if we don't do it, the whole world will suffer. Okay, well, that's the end point anyway, isn't it? What do we have for store for you here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy as we begin this fine Blue Moon Spirits Fridays? We are all Nighthawks in the diner of life. We are. All right. Well, on the rest of the menu, we already talked about Leonard Leo, the Thomases, et al. On the rest of the menu, Oregon state Republicans boycotted the legislature for the second straight day, so Democrats who control the chamber don't have a quorum to lawfully convene a vote. And what would those votes be for? Gun safety. Protecting people who are LGBTQ from the onslaught of this fascist movement, etc., etc., etc. They want to nullify what, apparently, according to them, only 3 counties in the state control everything else in the state. Well, they say majority rules, right? People vote. If you're unhappy about how people are voting, there's nothing that says you can't go to those counties, politic, knock on doors, and try to convince people of the error of their ways and join your so pure rural racism. Do it. The Republican Iowa governor will sign a bill to yank kids out of school and put them on the meatpacking floor for the night shift. You don't need to go to school. You can sleep then. And scores of new hearings were granted after it was discovered a Maryland judge negotiated a job position with local prosecutors. Nice. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where foreign citizens and companies would need U.S. government approval to buy property within 100 miles of 8 military bases. And China is the biggest global jailer of journalists. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link. The chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Yes, we still do that. And Kelly monitors it. Thank you, Kelly. And she's doing a hell of a lot more than just that. So thank you for everything, Kelly. If you would, out there in radio listening land, take a gander across your radio dial to the left, and hopefully your radio dial is set at our homepage at netrootsradio.com, because then you'll be able to know exactly what I'm talking about, and that is that there's a link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio and help us pay our bills, that would really help. It does. And I'll tell you how you can help. If you could afford to send us what you would spend on, how about an espresso type coffee drink? If you could afford to send that to us once a month, it really does help us pay those bills and all the other costs that are incurred to run this powerhouse of resistance. Yeah, we like to think that we're more than pamphleteers. Okay, graffiti artists out there in the urban landscape. And I'll tell you why. Because people like you have allowed us to fulfill our civic duty for over a dozen years, as the founders originally intended so many years ago. And that's just a roundabout way of saying thank you for your generosity. And please do send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink. It really does help. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of those and a lot more too. Thanks, Tom. Follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable at Justice Putnam. Fancy that. I post the show notes and links diary automatically 10 minutes before showtime, and you can always find those show notes and links diaries on Daily Co's by the links provided in my social media feed, so go do it. You can also follow the show. I assure you I will take better care in taking care of the social media parts of the show. But right now, such as it is on Twitter, you can follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. That's right, Cookbook West. And most importantly, do please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. They're everywhere. Okay, our podcast going to go the way of the blog? Maybe. We still monitor our chat room. I never had yes, I did. I had briefly an AOL account. Darn it. I thought I'd get through without having one, but I did. Very short. Very briefly. Very briefly. Alrighty. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is out of the Associated Press by Claire Rush and Andrew Zelsky. Most Republican members of the Oregon Senate failed to show up for the second straight day yesterday, Thursday, delaying action by the majority Democrats on bills on gun safety, abortion rights, and gender-affirming health care. The stay-away prevented a quorum, with Senate President Rob Wagner calling for another try today. Republican lawmakers have used walkouts in the past, but this time, if they continue to stay away, they'll be testing a law approved overwhelmingly in a ballot measure last November. that bans lawmakers with 10 unexcused absences from running for re-election. The boycott comes as several state houses around the nation, including in Montana and Tennessee, have become battlegrounds between conservatives and liberals. Oregon has increasingly been divided between liberal population centers like Portland and Eugene, and is mostly conservative rural areas. And the people in the rural areas think that they're so pure. They should have more power than all those people. Look at all this land we have. It's so much bigger than all those people. The leader of the Senate Republicans, Senator Tim Knopp, spoke on the phone with Democratic Governor Tina Kotek after telling journalists on Wednesday that a derailed legislative session would jeopardize the governor's legislative agenda, including tackling homelessness. If we let them get away with anything, they'll just keep getting voted back into office. Knopp's spokesperson, Ashley Kunze, said Kotek expressed willingness to help resolve the impasse, but the governor's office had a different characterization of the call, with Knopp being asked to stop the boycott. The governor listened to his concerns and reiterated that he is making choices, said Kotek spokesperson Elizabeth Shepard. She asked him to choose to get back to work to do the people's business. Knopp told a news conference on Wednesday that Republicans are protesting because bill summaries are not being written in plain language, even though a 1970 law requires they be readable by anyone with an 8th or 9th grade education. You can't write a measure or a bill in this state unless it's dumbed down to an 8th to 9th grade level. Ponder that for a moment. We have to dumb down the language in our bills so that dimwits like this can be able to understand the bill, and they're still not able to understand it. And somehow that's the complexity of the bill's fault. Senate Majority Leader Kate Lieber said that that's just a pretext and noted that the vast majority of bills have passed already with bipartisan support, including on housing and attracting the semiconductor industry to Oregon. This is about abortion, guns, and transgender rights, Lieber said. The timing of this is such that they're walking out on important legislation that Oregonians sent us here to do. The Senate added this weekend to its schedule to convene starting at 9 a.m. on Saturday and Sunday. The existence of the readability law, passed by the legislature in 1979 with bipartisan support, was discovered, I should say rediscovered, in April by a Republican caucus staffer. You know, they're always looking for ways that they can use the law against us, exactly how the Nazis did. Do you think I'm kidding? Let's see. Knopp said he does not know when the law was last employed to make bill summaries easy to read because it never has. Asked if the Republican boycott was due to the bills on gun control and abortion and gender-affirming care, Knopp said, it's about every bill, but those bills specifically also don't qualify under this law, and they refuse to fix them. You can't understand an 8th, 9th grade reading level, and you're saying that somehow it's everybody else's fault? Knopp said Republicans are reviewing bills to see if they pass the readability test. Okay. They're going to add more dimwits to the caucus to be able to figure out if they can read. He added that Legislative Council, the nonpartisan office that drafts legislation, in large part is to blame for the bills not meeting Oregon law. I would submit that these bills are meeting Oregon law by only meeting the 8th to 9th grade threshold. It is not the state of Oregon's fault. It is not the Legislative Council's fault that those elected to office by The poorly educated are so poorly educated they are incapable of reading at an 8th to 9th grade level. Jacob Bogage of the Washington Post brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds said she will sign a bill to roll back labor protections for children, allowing them to work longer hours and take jobs that had been prohibited. The measure would permit children as young as 14 to work in roofing, construction, and demolition, provided they are part of educational or apprenticeship programs and a parent is granted permission for the work. They would also be allowed to do light assembly work and assist customers that sell fireworks, for instance, as long as no machines are present. The legislation eliminates state regulations on the number of hours 16 and 17-year-olds can work and allows them to serve alcohol in restaurants with parental permission. It also bars workers younger than 18 from working in establishments where nude or topless dancing is performed. Well, that's nice. The bill lifts unnecessary restrictions on minors who wish to work and creates new opportunities for young people to get ahead in life or save money for college and be the poorly educated so they continue to vote the way we tell them. As speculated in this reporter's opinion. Also of the Washington Post brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook at Speakeasy. At least 2 criminal defendants will get new sentencing hearings in Montgomery County, Maryland, after their original penalties were handed down by a judge who had been quietly discussing a pending job switch to the local prosecutor's office. Another defendant who received an important and unfavorable ruling from the same judge will get a chance to have his case dismissed. The rulings reflect the actions of recently retired Montgomery Circuit Judge David Boynton. Last year, while still on the bench, he began negotiating with the state attorney's office about going to work there. Boynton then presided over a series of criminal hearings without disclosing the job discussions or his subsequent agreement to take the position. 4 of his decisions have been challenged by defense attorneys who said Boynton contradicted Maryland laws, stating that a, quote, judge shall act at all times in a manner that promotes public confidence in the independence, integrity, and impartiality of the judiciary, end quote. They say he should have disclosed the job discussions and possibly recused himself from any criminal matters. While the 3 cases mentioned earlier are headed for hearings before a new judge on narrow issues, how long a sentence should be, whether a case should be dismissed based on an earlier argument over the right to a speedy trial, the 4th case could become much more protracted, and it may include a full evidentiary hearing with Boynton and state's attorney John McCarthy called as witnesses. There has been a breach of trust here. I think a pretty significant one, Michael Beach, Montgomery's head public defender, said in court on Wednesday, adding, "There's a certain brazenness to the ethical issues that I think are at play here and have been violated here." He is demanding firm evidence of how far back the job negotiations went between Boynton and prosecutors, who have said they began on November 17th. "There is a specific timeline that I'm not willing to accept at this point," Beach said. He made the argument in court before Senior Judge Leo Green, Jr., who normally presides over cases in neighboring Prince George's County, but has been brought in to handle the cases being challenged. Green said he will hold a hearing for the fourth case and asked Beach and prosecutor Peter Larson if there were ways to limit how full-blown the hearing will be. Rather than putting Boynton and McCarthy on the witness stand, for example, Boynton could take depositions from them, or perhaps through informal conversations with Boynton and Green said. Beach could become comfortable with precisely when the job discussion started. Another option, one that Beach had suggested in court filings, would be for Boynton and McCarthy to provide copies of written communications they engaged in that could cement when they started talking about the position. Well, that brings us to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netradio.com. Please try again.
From a point at sea to the surface of your mind. A new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, Disaster Mover. Back in 2011, an earthquake and tsunami killed over 19,000 people when it devastated Japan's Tohoku region. Moved, writer-director Makoto Shinkai has said, "There's this divide between those who experienced the disaster firsthand and everyone else." Such disasters have been the backdrop of Shinkai's work until now, but his most recent animated film, Suzume, brings them very much to the forefront. Suzume is a 17-year-old high school junior who lost her single-parenting mom in the Tohoku disaster and has lived with her aunt ever since. One day, Suzume meets a young man named Sauta and learns that a great destructive worm lives confined beneath Japan, and that earthquakes are its attempts to escape, and devastating ones are when the worm succeeds. Due to a curse and a wayward god, Suzume joins Sauta to close portals in abandoned, forgotten disaster ruins and keep the worm from coming through. Critics, and even Shinkai himself, are calling Suzume a coming-of-age story, but I don't see it, and strangely, I don't miss it. Suzume doesn't have to learn or overcome anything. At movie start, she is who she needs to be. She sees a threat that others don't and takes action. Literally. The film celebrates her physical exertion. Suzume doesn't fight, but she runs, she vaults fences, bikes up mountains, is up for a 20K run, and though all that helps, her quest is more fueled by the generosity she finds from strangers. In fact, the film shows, ironically, how much harder it is to manage connections with people you know than forge them with those whom you don't. As much as Suzume is a love letter to Japan, complete with a cross-country chase and gorgeously rendered vistas, I found much in it to move non-Japanese me with my concerns about the global climate apocalypse, specifically the need to acknowledge current and past disasters while looking at how we must act to avert or at least survive the cataclysms to come. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is the story of a very special woman. In a matter of seconds, she turned herself into a great mathematician or an entrepreneur. Her knowledge was limitless and still is. She could also make monsters disappear, especially those that lurked in the shadows under the bed. Once, this woman put back together a teenage girl's broken heart, which had been shattered in 1,000 pieces. Just by giving her a bear hug. She masqueraded as a regular person at work. but as a superhero at home. Everyone knows her as Gabriella. I still call her Mom.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need to help, complete with tips and resources at aarp.org/caregiving. A public service announcement brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
I have to concede one point. Today's far-right Republican Party does not discriminate against women. In fact, the GOP is giving its female political buffoons a higher profile than its male bozos. Consider Sarah Huckabee Sanders, governor of Arkansas, who became a star in the new Republican crusade to bring back child labor abuse. Pushed by their corporate backers, GOP governors and lawmakers exclaim that the answer to America's so-called labor shortage is not to make jobs more attractive, but to fill them with cheap, compliant children. Huckabee Sanders rushed to the aid of these corporate powers, eliminating a bothersome Arkansas law that had required Tyson, Walmart, and other big employers to get a special state permit to put any child under 16 to work. The meddling hand of big government creeping down from Washington, D.C., she bellowed, will be stopped cold. We will get the over-regulating, micromanaging, bureaucratic tyrants off your backs. So she is using the meddling hand of big state government to creep into the lives of vulnerable children. She is not alone. Ohio's Republican-controlled state government is moving to extend the number of hours bosses can make children work. Iowa wants to let 14-year-olds work in industrial freezers and laundries, and Republicans in Congress have shrunk the number of investigators and lawyers policing child labor abuse, so abusive corporate managers know there is little chance they'll be caught. Most damning, these corporate politicians value children so little that they've set the maximum fine for violating the workplace safety of minors at $15,000 per child. For multi-million-dollar conglomerates, that devaluation makes it much cheaper to endanger children than protect them. This is Jim Hightower saying America should not even be talking about child safety rules in dangerous workplaces. It's shameful to have any children working there.
20 years after the United States government began locking up people in Guantanamo Bay, why are prisoners still there, not yet having had a trial? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. Some are in Gitmo because although they've been cleared for release, that is, they've been found to not pose a danger, they can't be returned to their home country. Others are there because they were so relentlessly tortured that a trial isn't possible, so they just sit. George W. Bush, whose administration set up the Gitmo detention facility, by the end of his second term said, quote, he very much wanted to close Gitmo. Barack Obama, early on, committed to closing it, but he didn't. Donald Trump said that Gitmo was a good way to deal with, quote, bad dudes, and signed an executive order to keep it open. President Joe Biden, in contrast, early on said he wanted to close Gitmo, but that hasn't happened yet either. It's time. It's past time that the administration figured out how to make that happen. After all, how can the United States stand as a beacon for the rule of law when our prison in Guantanamo still holds prisoners day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, with, for most, no trial and no end in sight? The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1931. That was the day that became known as the Battle of Harlan, or the Battle for Everts. Harlan County, Kentucky was coal country. Miners worked long hours underground and faced dangerous and often deadly working conditions. If they attempted to form a union, they risked not only losing their jobs, but also getting evicted from their company housing. Despite this response, starting in the 1920s, the United Mine Workers of America began to make headway in organizing miners. In Harlan, the miners who dared organize were fired. They and their families were thrown out of their homes. The company brought in hired guns to enforce the evictions and to keep the union out of the mines. Union miners and these gun thugs met on the road outside of the town of Everts. A gun battle broke out. 3 company men and 1 miner were killed. The governor of Kentucky once admitted, quote, "There exists a virtual reign of terror in Harlan County, financed in general by a group of coal mine operators in collusion with certain public officials. The victims of this reign of terror are the coal miners and their families." The Harlan County mine wars raged on for the next decade. In all, 13 miners would give their lives trying to bring a union to the Kentucky coal fields. It was one of the bloodiest struggles of the U.S. labor movement. Bloody Harlan earned its nickname.
They say in Harlan County there are no neutrals there. He would be a union man without the changed clan. Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on?
Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 49 degrees Fahrenheit, a little bit cooler this morning than what we've had. Highs will only be topping out in the low 60s, and we're going to have cloudy with showers this morning in through the afternoon. Winds will be out of the west-southwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, and then steady light rain this evening, and then showers continuing overnight, with lows in the mid-40s, winds out of the west at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Looks like we're going to have about a quarter inch of rain between today and tonight. And then showers continuing tomorrow morning. Then cloudy in the afternoon. Highs again in the low 60s. Winds out of the west at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And then some more rain coming in Saturday night, Sunday, Monday. And we'll see how long it goes through the rest of the week. Looks like grass pollen is now rated as high here in the little village of Rogue River, Oregon. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 27 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is very high at level 8. So slather on the SPF. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 29.94 inches, and it looks to be dropping in just about an hour. Visibility is at 9 miles, and relative humidity is at 88%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 65 and mostly cloudy on a Coronation Eve. Paris is 68 and mostly cloudy with a thunderstorm advisory that could impact critical electrical infrastructure. Rome is 75 and sunny. Kyiv is 62 degrees and partly cloudy. Kabul is 60 and cloudy. Hong Kong is 80 degrees and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 68 and fair. Sydney, Australia is 57 and clear. San Francisco, California is 55 degrees and cloudy. And New York, New York is 60 degrees Fahrenheit and mostly cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Margaret Stafford, Tara Kopp, and Fatima Hussein bring us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Foreign citizens and companies would need U.S. government approval to buy property within 100 miles of 8 military bases under a proposed rule that follows a Chinese firm's attempt to build a plant near an Air Force base in North Dakota. The Treasury Department's Office of Investment Security is set to propose the rule today. The rule would give expanded powers to the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, which screens business deals between U.S. firms and foreign investors and can block sales or force the parties to change the terms of agreement to protect national security. Controversy arose over plans by the Fufang Group to build a $700 million wet corn milling plant about 12 miles from the Grand Forks Air Force Base, which houses air and space operations. As opposition to the project grew, North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum and U.S. Senator John Hervin and Kevin Cramer, all Republicans, raised questions about the security risks and asked the federal government last July for an expedited review. The agency told Fufang in September that it was reviewing the proposal and eventually concluded that it did not have enough jurisdiction to stop the investment. The plans were eventually dropped after the Air Force said the plant would pose a significant threat to national security.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Anonymous staff at the Associated Press, and who can blame them considering the content of this last amuse-bouche. Here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. China was the biggest global jailer of journalists last year, with more than 100 behind bars as President Xi Jinping's government tightened control over society. Xi's government also was one of the biggest exporters of propaganda content, according to Reporters Without Borders. China ranked second to last on the group's annual index of press freedom, behind only neighbor North Korea. The ruling Communist Party has tightened already strict controls on media in China, where all newspapers and broadcasters are state-owned. Websites and social media are required to enforce censorship bans that bans material that might spread opposition to one-party rule. Xi, China's most powerful figure in decades, called during a 2016 meeting with journalists who had been awarded official prizes for them to adhere to the correct orientation of public opinion. Xi is pursuing a crusade against journalism. Wow, that seems to be going around. And Reporters Without Borders called China's decline in press freedom disastrous. Beijing operates what is regarded as the world's most extensive system of internet controls. Its filters try to block the Chinese public from seeing websites abroad operated by news outlets, governments, and human rights and other activist groups. Chinese journalists have been prosecuted on charges of spying, leaking national secrets, and picking quarrels, a vague accusation used to jail dissidents. Others are subject to surveillance, intimidation, and harassment. Wow. Coming to a United States near you. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and the week. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here on Monday for River City Hash Monday. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day, all night, and all weekend for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here on Monday, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.